Hello everyone, I'm back with another video for you today, and today I wanted to talk about the recent balance changes, as well as just sort of the general way that the game is being balanced and my thoughts on it. I think the way that it's being done currently is not very healthy for the game, and I'm a little bit worried, honestly, about the health of the meta, how enjoyable the game will be to play, and sort of how many players will want to continue playing as a result. Now, I'm not sure it's the end of the world just yet, but the writing on the wall is there, I feel, for the future not looking as bright as it could be for Marvel Snap. So I want to just talk a little bit about my thoughts on how the game should be balanced. I don't very often make videos like this because I don't feel like the devs probably even watch them or really care about my opinion, which is fair enough. And why should they, right? I'm just one guy on the internet. There's many people out there giving their own opinions, but nonetheless, I did want to talk about it. So anyway, let's get into some of the changes here. So firstly, we've had a big change to Thanos and Quinjet and that interaction. Quinjet now has a minimum of 1. The lowest cost that it can reduce to is 1. So of course, Thanos stones Quinjet no longer a thing. There's also been some changes to the Shuri deck in that Red Skull is now working a bit differently. It's Red Skull's now 13 strength. The ongoing effect is not as bad as it was before. So in some way, this might be considered a buff to certain Red Skull builds. If you have to play that Red Skull out, then not going to be such a downside, you know, if you're not using a 0 on it, for example. So in some way, this might be kind of a buff to Shuri in that the Red Skull is now playable more easily without negating his effect, which is something that Shuri would be doing a lot, right? You play Shuri 4, Red Skull 5. In some way, that line of play is now, in fact, a little bit better, which is quite wacky. So Red Skull's kind of been buffed, although in decks that do not utilize Shuri, Red Skull is probably a bit weaker. Things like, you know, 0, just value decks. If you were to play Sauron, I guess, without Shuri, then Red Skull's a bit weaker. So this change, I do not like that change. That's a weird one. But okay, Taskmaster and Mystique and Absorbing Man are now working differently. Where is Taskmaster in my collection? I can't. Here's Taskmaster. So the card now has to be in play for it to be getting the power. So of course you can now Shang-Chi and deny Taskmaster. I don't think this is super relevant though, because in the decks that usually run Taskmaster, it might be relevant for Mystique and Absorbing Man, which have now the same key, you know, wording on the card. For Taskmaster here, if you have an armor or a Cosmo on the board, then they're not going to be able to destroy the unit that the Taskmaster wants to copy. That's something that makes Shuri very strong. The fact that they can play armor and Cosmo in a location and then just copy the Taskmaster. So while this change in theory would make Shuri decks more Shang-Chi-able and quite vulnerable to that, I think in reality, not going to happen very often. So okay, that is what it is. But the big change that I really want to talk about is with Aero, of course. Aero is a card in like so many decks. Almost every deck wanted to run Aero or had to at least have a plan for Aero, how to beat it, how to play around it in the final stages of the game. Now it's just been completely gutted, and instead of moving all of the cards that your opponent plays on a specific turn, it only moves the last enemy card played to this location. So a little bit of a strength buff to account for it, but yeah, we've now got a card that I've tested a little bit, and it's just pretty damn useless, I think, unless you are against a deck with a super specific turn 6 play. Maybe they only are playing one card and you can still do that Aero turn 6 if you have priority. But if you're against Galactus, this could still be useful. You know, they play Wave into Galactus, you can maybe move that Galactus again if you have priority. But I don't see this card being played very often because it's basically now a very specific counter to certain decks, the Galactus, and as I said, maybe some kind of weird Destroyer turn 6 lines of play, you know, some big card at the end of the game. It's not reliable enough, I think, to be particularly good, this Aero. It might be good in clog decks. I could see it being good in a clog deck where you fill a location up with the Aero, but aside from that, we don't have Aero as that pool 3 powerhouse card that could just deal with any deck. Now, I think this might be good for the health of the game in the long run, because Aero was really powerful and it did really stop a lot of strategies from being played where you want to, you know, not play on board and not get initiative and then just play a lot of cards at the end of the game. I kind of think that's not necessarily a good thing, because those strategies really are hard to interact with, right? Things like She-Hulk, Moon Girl, if you're just saving up all your cards for the end, how can the opponent prevent that if they don't have an Aero now? They're just going to have to sit there, see you skip turn 5 and go, oh, Okay, guess I'm getting She-Hulked here, and I can't really do a lot about that. So I think the lack of Aero is going to mean there are a lot of strategies that are very hard to disrupt. The Galactus, if Aero is not, worth putting in your deck, Galactus becomes way better. That's a very uninteractable and binary deck to face, and it's going to be quite frustrating to face up against, I think. So yeah, I'm not too hot on this Aero change. I think it's going to mean if you're a pool 3 player, you have a lot less options to deal with the pool 4, pool 5 decks, because Aero was sort of the way you could do that, right? You play like a value-based deck, like the Colleen Swarm stuff, or, just some good value in some way, whether it's Yellow Jacket and movement card, like whatever it can be. You could have Aero there as a nice way to secure a win when you're playing to get ahead on the board early in the game. You're playing so that the early game matters, so that you can Aero them at the end. And now the early game doesn't necessarily matter. Your opponent's going to play a combo deck that just messes you up, I think, and you're not going to have any counterplay to that. So I think right now, as the game stands, without any other options to properly deal with those kind of turn 6 lines that can be really powerful, I'm a bit worried for the sort of meta and how that's going to look. And of course, Shuri, I don't know what's going on with this Red Skull change. I don't know, Shuri looks really strong, right? It was one of the top tier decks before. You've had Thanos nerfed, you've had Aero nerfed, which was a pretty good tool for dealing with Shuri. You've had Red Skull arguably buffed even. So yeah, I think probably Shuri's in a great spot, and I think it's a little tone deaf, a little bizarre, these changes. I feel like it speaks to a bit of a misunderstanding of what's going on in the game, but I'll get onto that now. So I think the core problem with the balance philosophy is that the devs in Marvel Snap are basically going off of their statistics, right? They're using statistics. They're saying, oh, this card is played this amount. This card has this win rate. This card wins this matchup against this deck, right? They're seeing all their stats. They have loads of numbers, loads of analytics that they can use to gauge the strength of cards. And I'm sure they think this is a very foolproof way of balancing, right? They see, oh, Red Skull. Well, Red Skull's a card that's in Sauron decks, it's in Shuri decks, it's being played with 0. It's got a high win rate on its own, presumably, and high play rate possibly as well. Let's nerf Red Skull. It's going to weaken the Shuri decks. It's going to do this and that. Now, the issue with this kind of statistical analysis is it leaves out all the context on why the stats are a certain way, right? So when the Marvel Snap devs see, as they have said, they've seen that Sauron, for example, is a very high win rate card. Sauron, of course, removes the ongoing negative effects of your card, so it's good with Red Skull, right? When they see that Sauron is a very high win rate card, they're not thinking about the context of why that would be the case. They're just saying, oh, that must mean Sauron is very powerful. Well, not necessarily. I mean, yes, but more importantly, Sauron is very powerful when played with Shuri, right? When played with Shuri. I don't have Shuri in my collection. You guys know what the card does. It's doubling the next power of the next card you play. So Sauron's very good with Shuri. Interesting. Shuri also happens to be a top tier deck at the moment, right? Is it possible that Sauron is only ever played with Shuri, and that's why the win rate looks higher? Is it possible that Shuri has a lower win rate than Sauron because people play different kinds of Shuri decks? They play Black Panther decks, maybe. They play some kind of Nimrod stuff. Is it possible that the Sauron is really representative of just the power of Shuri? You see, I don't think the Marvel Snap devs are properly interpreting the stats, and I think that's leading them to make some really wacky balance decisions, right? The Shuri deck is the problem. It's not so much the Red Skull in the Shuri deck. It's just the fact that Shuri, when you build around it effectively to get good value from it and to disrupt the opponent's destruction effects on your big card with armor and Cosmo, then that's very powerful. And that's just something that I don't think is quite in the mind of the devs here, like, with the Taskmaster change and whatnot, which is welcome. It's a welcome change, but I don't think it addresses the real strength of Shuri properly. And of course, the Aero change. It all just feels a little not quite right to me. I think the same philosophy can be seen when they changed Thanos. They buffed Thanos to 9 strength, if you guys remember. Basically, their reasoning was, on their statistics, Thanos was not being played out in many games of Thanos. And the reason for that is just, well, you have lots of other good cards in a Thanos deck, right? Devil Dinosaur was being played. Some people were playing Dr. Octopus Thanos at the time, if I'm not mistaken. So there were other options to go for. You often weren't getting all the stones played necessarily, which is what makes Thanos hard to get his value from, right? If you get all the stones out, the Thanos is strong. If you don't, he's not as good of a play. So they misinterpreted the stats of Thanos not being played very often to mean, oh, Thanos is too weak. We should buff the stats of the card. No, that's not what it means. It just means that it's not very consistent to play all of the stones out in a game, right? And therefore it's not worth playing the Thanos play. So they ended up buffing Thanos, making him 11 strength. He was 9 previously. I'm not sure what I said before, but he was 9 previously. They made him 11 strength so that people would want to play the card more often. But basically, that they were trying to make it so Thanos was played even when you don't play all of the stones out, which kind of defeats the point, right? Why would you want to be playing the Thanos if he doesn't have all the Infinity Stones, if he doesn't get that Power Stone buff? That defeats the whole point of the card. So I think they just completely look at the stats there and go, oh, let's do this. And it just makes no sense. And it completely does, like, they're not understanding how the deck plays in the game itself, right? They're not seeing, this is how the deck plays out, this is how the cards interact. They're just seeing the stats, going, okay, the stats say this one thing, let's do this thing as a result of the stats. It's such a one-dimensional approach, and I think basically it's causing a lot of problems because you're not getting that proper context of what will actually be going on in a game of Marble Snap to give you those stats, right? They're not understanding where the stats come from, why the stats are like they are, right? Why a deck performs in the way it does, that kind of thing. So another example of this is the fact that Leech wasn't changed, which I think Leech is just a very problematic card, and arguably Lockjaw as well, right? The two of those sort of in conjunction, being able to pull Leech out of Lockjaw, removing, I mean, you can just deny so many different styles of decks with the Leech, and I think it's a very unfun play pattern. I think the Time Stones stuff with Lockjaw, I do think Leech is a problematic card, and I think if you've played a lot of Marble Snap the past month, you're probably aware that Leech is kind of a problematic card. I think Leech is far worse than Leader. I think Leader, people probably, it was a bit of a pain. It was a bit too strong, the Leader, but I think people maybe overreacted a bit to the unfairness of Leader, shall we say? Should we put it that way? I don't think Leader was unfair. You could play around it. It was overpowered. It was a bit too strong, right, at 3 strength, but I think that effect wasn't necessarily unfair. Whereas Leech, if it comes from a Lockjaw, you're doomed, mate. It's over. It's over. The game's over. Like, you have no counterplay to what the opponent's doing if you get leeched. And if they're already doing unfair things with the Lockjaw and whatnot, then yeah, it's just a recipe for disaster. So I think the devs, again, they look at their stats and they've said, yeah, there's only one good deck with Leech. Why is that? Why could that be? It's because that deck runs Lockjaw and allows you to play Leech. By the way, normal Lockjaw with Leech is pretty damn strong. I think it's a good deck. It's a little difficult to play and a bit more inconsistent than Thanos Lockjaw. But with that being said, yeah, Leech is only good when it's used with Lockjaw and Time Stone. Go figure. That's kind of obvious if you played the game, right? Like, no one's playing a random turn 5 Leech out here. So they're seeing that. They're not understanding or appreciating, I think, how obnoxious and unfair that combo can be. It's not necessarily just about the stats and seeing, oh, well, Thanos, yes, it's got a very high win rate, but let's just nerf it in a different way. No, this is something you should be considering because it creates some very uninteresting and unfun play patterns, shuts down a bunch of decks, I think. And now, I can't speak for the other regions in the game, but I know Thanos Leech was just everywhere. like everywhere on the region that I'm playing on, at the rank I'm playing on. You couldn't really play a game of Marble Snap without considering this card. I'm not sure it will still be that way now that the Quinjet and stuff has been nerfed. I think Thanos has actually been nerfed to 10 strength as well. He got a tiny nerf. They had to revert the buff that they did, the tone deaf buff. They buffed Thanos when he was already like a top tier deck, by the way, which I just find hilarious. Anyway, this is the problem with stats and the way that they're interpreting them. You're gonna make really wonky balance decisions, in my opinion, and I think it's gonna lead to metas that are really frustrating for players who have played the previous season, seen the decks that are good, seen how they've then been even encouraged to be better, or the certain frustrating archetypes that will flourish, like Galactus perhaps. as a result of these kind of changes. I think that's going to be really demoralizing for players. I think that's, you know, if you're a more casual player, if you're not super invested in the game, if you're maybe not, you know, if the sunk cost fallacy doesn't get to you in a big way, then I could definitely see a lot of people sort of playing the game less, maybe even leaving the game if these kind of balance decisions keep being made. I've already talked to people who don't play this game like super passionately, and they're just saying, oh my god, these changes are awful. I'm not going to play this game too much anymore. I'm just doing the dailies. I'm just sort of getting some credits maybe and just logging off. Like, I can't be I'm not spending money on the game. I'm not going to be competing or, you know, playing the game a lot. It's just, when you're making changes like this, it really just makes the game a lot less fun, I think, overall. So I won't get into card collecting and token shop and all that stuff because I don't really have many thoughts to share on that. But that's another angle that might be bad for the game, right? I'm not sure how this new token shop stuff's working. It should be good that you get Series 3 card every month, right? But yeah, I don't have any thoughts on that particularly, but I do think the balancing of this game is just a bit of a meme at this point, like, and I think the developers really need like a proper... So okay, let's talk solutions. What do they do here? I think the Marvel Snap guys need a proper data analytics person, someone that can interpret data correctly, someone that's maybe played the game or has an understanding of the game, quite a deep understanding, and then they can apply that, you know, with the statistics. They can use the context of the gameplay and the decks within the game and such to actually craft a better picture of what should be changed, because I think these changes honestly miss the mark. I think they're not super good for the game. I don't mind the Aero change, by the way. I think it's healthy overall in the long term, but I do think you probably needed some other changes to account for and offset the fact that this is going to just completely demolish a lot of pool 3 options. You know, you're basically screwed if you don't have a super OP combo in the game, right? If your deck isn't playing for something just outrageously strong, because, well, Aero could control the outrageously strong stuff by making you play a fair game, making you play for initiative, for getting ahead on the board. But now, do whatever you want, man. Just go crazy. Play your Galactus, play your She-Hulks at the end. Do whatever you want to do. Shuri, sure. I think that's the main issue. It's going to be harder for you know, newer players to really compete with these big decks. It's going to be a more frustrating experience for the newer pool 3 guys that are coming in and don't have access to the Thanos, the Galactus, the Shuri, the, you know, whatever. So, you know, it's not all doom and gloom, but that's just what I think needs to be done. I think there needs to be better interpretation of the stats. Maybe should be some consulting going on with some people that play the game a lot, some higher ranked people, or some data scientists, like whatever it might be. I think that would help a lot with the balance direction. But let me know what you guys think. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair, maybe I'm being too harsh. It's just my opinion, of course. I do think, yeah, I think the changes not very good this time round, and I think the changes in the past have been a bit wonky. But with that being said, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Do subscribe as always for more Snap content. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.